everybody in the architecture community. I wanted to welcome all of you all. Thank you so much for agreeing at such short notice. I have two cabin announcements, and both are for the audience actually. So if you're watching on the phone, I suggest if you have a computer close by, because then you can see the whole panelist together and not only the person who's talking. And the second is, if you have come to see them show their work, then I suggest you have to log off, because they're not going to be technically showing their work. We really want to understand from them what is their mind space right now. So with that, welcome guys. Thank you for being so gracious and agreeing. I'm, as mentioned in my note, I'm going to quickly dive in and get into the hi and why section, and allow you all to introduce yourself clockwise and tell us why did you agree to be part of a discussion of really, of questions. And we don't want any answers. We want as many questions for you all to rake up. So why did you all, agree to be part of lockdown learning stroke unlearning? Bijoy, you want to start?
Who's number one?
Bijoy.
So Sameep.
Alphabetically, so Ambrish should go.
Yeah. Well, that's or Bijoy.
No, why? Now, Bijoy, you want to begin?
Well, thanks for inviting us, Sarita, to be together. And I mean, why did I agree? Because I mean, who would miss up a chance to be with these guys? I mean, for us, it's been quite a tough time. I mean, to be absolutely honest. And so, I mean, as much as I don't really have any lockdown learnings to share, but I'm hoping that in spending time with these guys, that at least one has some sense of where things are headed and how one can manage a time that's quite both wonderful, because I get all this time at home, but also in a way stressful. So yeah, that's why I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was feeling rather left out, not a single webinar. So thanks, Sarita, for filling the gap.
Yeah, I'm just go on. Sorry, I thought you were done.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm good. Yeah, you start, Kapil.
So I'm just glad to have internet connectivity after 60 days of lockdown. But I think more kind of seriously, I think I've been talking to Sarita generally about broad concerns as an architect for a long time, and it just felt like an opportune time, this moment of what I'm calling stillness right now. I mean, that's what it is in a certain sense. To think about and to contemplate, not only the kind of work that we're doing, or what you imagine could be new ways of working, within the profession. And I think it's an important conversation, and I think we're all peers here, and it would have been great, like we were talking, to have other professions as well. But I think this can be a useful conversation. Thanks.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I'm here because I mean, I wouldn't let up a chance to be with the people, some of the people I admire the most in our fraternity. And I think I too, while I've been thoroughly enjoying the time home with my boys are in boarding school now, they're back home, and it's been incredible to spend time just hanging out together as a family. On the work front, I think I just hope, I do look forward to this conversation to generate some ideas. I'm taking one day at a time, and yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to the chat.
Thanks, Sarita. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, it's great to see all of you guys together. It's something that happens very, very rarely, and I'm just happy to kind of hang around with you guys for some time and chat. Well, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I kind of joined. I wanted to come and chat on this. Is really, I think there's an incredible spatial implication that comes out of the crisis we are in. Obviously, there are various other professions that have, in some sense, to kind of figure out where we're going to go. But I think because of this partial implication, there's a huge role for architects and designers to also start contemplating not just about our practices in the way that we run them, but just also in terms of what practice means going forward. I think that for me is critical. Besides that, the other reason why I'm here is because I have been recording a lot of my songs. I've been singing and practicing and recording songs, and my family is fed up. So anything is a welcome break from that. So yeah.
So we're going to ask you to sing at the end of the session.
Yeah. You're going to have to sing for your supper, Sameep.
Nobody sings really well. So that's a plus point. So, I'm going to kind of, take the thread from what Sameep said and talked about the practice, right? And I think one of the amazing things about this lockdown is the kind of words it has thrown up, right? When they talk about social distancing, when they talk about isolation, they talk about lockdown. Technically, they all have a visual in the architecture. So when you say lockdown, there is the architecture is the biggest visual of that depicts the word, right? When you look at the lockdown in the last 45 days, it's meant different things to different professions. So the medical fraternity has a certain path they're going to take post this 45 days. You have the entertainment industry. Who would think you'd get fed up of Netflix? You're like, I've seen everything now. I don't know. So the OTT platforms are going to go in a certain way, right? For the architecture profession, just as somebody who's observing it, you've seen 45 days. You've seen how your practice has stopped, not stopped. Your client has. There's an implication on his business. It's all in the nebulous space right now. We don't know what's happening, what's going to happen post the lockdown opening, right? How these words, when we talk about the practice, right? What is the anxiety? What is the kind of perspective that has changed in these 45 days, even unwillingly? See, you may not have sat down to really think about it, but it's something that's now in the pit of the stomach saying, something's going to change, right? So when you look at the practice, when you look at your own practice or the practice of architecture, and I would request each panelist to separate it and talk about it. What are your, you could even ramble on it because there's no definite answer. What do you think is the impact of these 45 days? Not really COVID, because tomorrow we could get locked down for something else. But I think if you look at a situation like this, what is the impact on it? Would you be able to? And you could choose. Any panelist could go in first.
Well, I'll jump in. Since the thing is, I think the implications, like I said, of course, are spatial, and so there's a time to the profession. But I think beyond that, also there are certain values that I think we're all kind of enjoying to some extent, which is fantastic clean air, beautiful blue skies, and this, in some sense, is the aberration, right? This is not what we are used to. We've seen so many memes on this. But is there a way that we kind of rejig our profession, in the way that we actually, the values that we espouse in some sense? And should we be now looking at these values becoming default and the world that we previously inhabited being the aberration? So is there a way that we can, a crisis actually is a fantastic opportunity every time, not just this crisis, but a crisis is a great opportunity to look at reimagining the kind of worlds that we inhabit. And for that, I feel that we need to redefine the values that we thought were important, whether it is about working together in a studio or remotely. All of those are mechanisms, they are mediums, right? But I think what we need to do perhaps is go back and kind of examine the values that we prescribe to.
To me, in a sense, this kind of pandemic has been really a precursor to the kind of, let's say, devastation that climate change in any case is going to bring, or has already started to bring. It's almost like a lull before the storm. So yes, it is a shock. I think it's a shock. It's kind of shock therapy to the global economy. And I think that's what fundamentally architecture has always been an actual part of, right? We service the market. I mean, as a profession generally, right? That's what we've actually grown into. We've been agents for them, basically for the market and for the logic of unsustainable or capitalism. So the pandemic, in a certain sense, is almost forcing your hand now, right? To exactly what you're talking about, Sameep, to this new reality, which needs to be fundamentally sustainable. What's also interesting is that this realization that you can respond at a civilizational scale, right? Where it's always been about essentially competing interests, right? And we've always sided in a certain sense, broadly speaking, globally at that scale, fundamentally driven by the logic of basically markets, right? But they've always been sites of resistance where people have chosen to kind of break away, establish other ways of thinking and learning. And I don't think you've got enough practices, even in terms of architecture, who have defined in a certain sense a long time ago a way of working, a certain kind of ethic. And, for all you know, this is going to be forced on us. I mean, how much of this is going to be something that we will decide on? We really don't have that much power. We finally end up following in a certain sense, but we can be instruments where you can demonstrate what the possibilities are for this kind of a new future. And I think it's in that demonstration now that our critical roles in a certain sense lie, right?
Yeah.
Soumitro, you want to go ahead? Soumitro,
Yeah.
Ambrish?
Yeah, I think Ambrish, you go ahead. I'll take it after you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to make this very personal. I don't think I've still wrapped my head around, gotten to wrapping my head around what's happening. And at this stage, neither do I have hope nor despair. It's just, I think also the reasons for my being a practitioner are as much to do with the idea of practice itself and not the practice of design or the practice of spatial interpretation, as just the practice of people working together. And architecture and design happens to me just to be a medium for people to work together. And I kind of enter this whole space energetically. And for me, the entire reason I set up the practice was so that I would have a medium and a way to explore how people could work together and co-create together. And what's happened is, just yesterday we were all the principals. There are five of us, and a couple of others. We were having a chat. Okay, hypothetically, now the lockdown's over, and what are we going to be doing? What's our next step? And I mean, very quickly we found ourselves stuck. Okay, so you've got to keep a social distance, so means we have to be 6 feet apart. So then what does it mean? Like, how do we have a design discussion? So then everyone said we could be on our machines, and then if we need to be on our machines, then we might as well be at home. And it was just a very, it sounds very simplistic, but it was a very I think very vulnerable space to be in at that point in time, where I felt pretty helpless, in terms of just the nature of how we work together and what does it mean. Because I'm a huge believer in a lot of esoteric ideas of energy exchange when people are physically in physical presence. If you heard things like that. So for me, there was a huge sense of like, does it mean that now, and we are a very hugging office, so we are, all of us are constantly hugging each other, and there's a big part of what we do, and that's a big part of who I am. I mean, I'm a hugger. I mean, and thank God my kids are back, and I mean, and they hate me. They're 14-year-old boys, and I'm like, and my wife has had enough, and he says, and my son asked her the other day, aren't you bored of dad? You've been together 20 years, and I mean, so there are moments of really, for me, just coming to terms with I can't just go into office and hug my people around me. And to moments of just issues of survival. I remember when I started the practice, survival was the furthest thing. I mean, I really had no fear and no concept of money, and I needed very little to live off, and it was pure passion and pure ideas and pure drive. And I find that over a period of time, so-called success has made me a victim of fears. And so this whole kind of so it's more like issues of survival that are also kind of riding around us, saying what does it mean, how do we all go through it together. So far our approach has been whatever we do, we are going to go through it together. But what does that mean? Where does one draw lines? Who's together, who's not? Where so there are very fundamental kind of questions related both to the nature of how we will exist as a team, versus my own personal kind of reasons for being being a part of a team and really co-creating, that I'm just beginning to get present to the ramifications. So I'm still kind of dealing with that. And I think that I've really chosen the way of the ostrich. And well, not really the ostrich, I think an ostrich who's rooted with his head out of the sand and looking around and waiting. And I'm just observing right now and observing myself and my reactions and what's happening around, and kind of hopefully and really taking one day at a time and giving as much as I can to that day, and being responsive. And I think it's also been a great opportunity to look at the why of what I do, why I do what I do, and perhaps as a team asking, getting a sense of why are we doing what we're doing, and what is it each of us really want our practices to be about, and as a collective, what's the practice about. So it's a period of observation and the kind of processing right now. So that's where I am.
Soumitro?
Yeah. So one of the things I think we realized that things that we always thought was permanent. I hope the lockdown is not used for other purposes. I think the fragility of the time. I think it's something which a bit unnerving, but now I think there is great comfort in. Suddenly you notice, the gaps between the words and sounds, and so there is, I think, an impact on at a personal level. Yeah, there is that impact. There are other questions which become very obvious, that how little we need, and so you wonder, why did you ever want what you ever wanted? And I think Sameep touched upon this about how we live. We define homes as what, 1 BHK, 2 BHK. But suddenly you realize that when people spend so much time at home, suddenly they have become, actually, each one has become a much larger person as an individual. And that means it's going to change how we imagine homes, that it's not only going to be BHKs, but it's actually going to be person X and Y and their space and how they come together. So I think that's at one level, and I think I feel really sort of blessed that, okay, we have so much space for each one. And that's when I start thinking that, especially big cities, whether it's migrant labor living in, in enclosed single rooms with number of people, or even in the middle class when they just come to the city, and it's sort of a huddle, So, and so there, I think our imagination of places, once work moves to home, I think that imagination will change. And So it's going to have certain architectural impacts as well. I mean, in terms of patterns that will emerge from that. On the other side, it's on the idea of the city and whether we are. I mean, architects are known for shooting their buildings without any people. Now they would love to shoot their buildings, and more so the cities. You know, the cities are empty, absolutely empty. So it's like a socialist dream. You know, it's like even the road is a public space. You know? It's quite amazing. So I think maybe it's time to even redefine that from, I mean, multiplying it from the idea of the individual and the home and its redefinition to the idea of public space and its redefinition where actually public space becomes a place of joy. Since work has moved, is sort of getting collapsing into the home, and so the home is a seamless world, and where you meet is a place of joy. And of course, it's wonderful to meet like this. But yeah, I think I still look forward to meeting all you guys in person.
Ambrish is going to hug you when you meet you next.
Yeah.
No, we won't be allowed to, Bhaga. We won't be allowed to. Soumitro won't let me.
Bijoy, you want to take this?
Yeah, no, I am very sympathetic to what Ambrish said. I mean, it is a time that is quite uncertain and has sort of prompted. Of course, you take it one day at a time, and you hope you figure out some way to. And we also think of our practice as a collaborative office, and the same questions that you were asking. So if I'm going to get back to the office next week, we're really dying to start making models again to test all this stuff out that we've been sketching out. So how would you review the models? Would you stand far away and wear gloves? So I mean, all of that kind of is very, very tricky. But what's really come to light for us, and we pride ourselves as a practice where people are working together, but we've completely disenfranchised from that conversation the people who actually make our buildings. And so what came to light, early on in all of this process was, I spoke to a couple of my contractors, so what's going on, and then suddenly you're aware that there are these large groups of people, who've been toiling at your site, so completely invisible otherwise, at least for me. And now, of course, because of the concern that you read in the papers, you're also worried now, like what's happening to these people who were there at the site because they were there yesterday and suddenly it's a lockdown. Now what's going on? And the contractors are all struggling. They're all like, I don't know, sir, they have to get back home. 5 of them have disappeared from the site, etc. And so I just think, and I don't know what the answer to it is. It's prompting the question that the way we build, the way we conceptualize our buildings, can there be a more equitable way in which we do it? I mean, at a very base level, can the places where these people live on site, or the kind of amenities that are provided for them? I mean, we write all this stuff out in the contract, but is there any sort of system by which these processes are a little less so unjust and unfair to so many people who are doing the actual work that we imagine and create in the office? So that's really brought and we had this chat a few days ago with Vinu Daniel, the architect from Cochin, and he works a lot more sort of with his teams who are producing these buildings, and he was in a state of kind of panic. The 500 people on various sites, all kind of they don't have access to water on some of the sites, and though they're not directly appointed by him, it's prompting the question of what are we going to do with all of these people who are making our buildings. So that's one aspect of it, which is but I just want to touch upon what Soumitro said at the end, and also that this time has given me a lot of time to read, which is fantastic. And I read something that Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the person who wrote The Little Prince, just 2 years before he died. It's a very short quote, but he says, night, when words fade and things come alive, when the destructive analysis of day is done, and all that is truly important becomes whole and sound again, when man reassembles his fragmentary self and grows with the calm of the trees. That this moment where, like the night, where everything has kind of stopped and you're getting a chance to breathe again, and you're looking at the trees and smelling the flowers and hearing the bird song, that at this moment is actually a time to sort of really be rejuvenated. And so yesterday in the evening, I was downstairs with my mother-in-law and we were watching this Guruji, you know, on the TV. She watches these channels, and the Guruji said something really wonderful. He said, maybe we should have this 45-day lockdown every year, you know. We should just stop, you know, stop everything and then let things heal, and then we can get back to our horrible ways again, you know, so that at least every year there's a chance for a sort of fixing, you know. That's what I have.
I just sorry, I just wanted to, if I may, Soumitro, what you
Yes.
said, you know, about just public space and the chance to reimagine, and while all this has been happening, I mean, there's this. I mean, most of you might be aware this whole Central Vista project is being pushed down. There are multiple projects. You know, just yesterday I read there's been a sanction for 770 hectares of Rajaji National Park, you know, which is a huge biodiversity park in Uttarakhand, to be cleared for the Kumbh Mela in 2021. So
right.
under the, I mean, the people who really have an impact on decision making on public space, you know, while we are all kind of going through at least little nudges to our consciousness and questioning things and reassessing. I mean, it does, not to sound you know, despondent, but it does seem to be also given an opportunity for the powers that be to really use this almost like a cloak to push through like large kind of policy changes. I mean, or actually subverting the policy and push through on decision making. And I think there's a question of, you know, I really ask myself, what can I do in the face of this, you know? And there is a sense of either willing to really, I mean, there's this whole extreme thing. So at a personal level, a bit like what Bijoy said, one starts looking at one's own practice and the larger sphere of influence of the sites and the contractors and the manner in which we define what we engage with. But somewhere the forces that be, I mean, how does that how become a part of a, you know, a larger sphere of influence in a manner of speaking. So that's definitely something that gets thrown up.
Yeah, you know, in fact, I'm glad you said this, Ambrish, because, you know, I remember all of y'all as just, you know, as most of y'all as, I know y'all since at least a decade and a half. I've seen your practices grow and evolve beautifully. But even at the very onset, you know, when you said, remember why you started, you always had, all of you know, without exception, had the, you know, had the large, you all had the larger intention of social good through design. You all saw your practice as something that was resolving, you know, a city issue or nation issue in design and making it go forward. But you know, the last, and I've chatted with you all separately on this. Pre 45 days ago, you know, there was so much conversation about architects not engaging with policy, not engaging critically. You know, in the last 45 days, we've seen doctors come out, obviously in a big number. They're so critical to how we'll move forward. We've been literally tracking every webinar that has happened on architecture and design. But you know, in fact, I read a quote of Peter Zumthor that summed it up very well. He said that, you know, I've long given up the notion that as an architect I can change the world. Okay, and that's from Peter Zumthor, right? Is there a kind of, because, you know, this is the time where architects really have a "I told you so" moment. All of y'all have been saying everything that we see. You have been talking about the devastating effects of climate change. You have been talking about sustainable practices. You have been talking about sensitivity in design. 45 days have demonstrated, you know, the need for all of that. And yet, do you feel that you feel more helpless than 45 days before, or and how do you really become relevant? You know, how does the profession become relevant? The government is one thing, you know, guys, but even for the lay person to look and say, you know what, only architects can resolve this for us. We look at it, we look at other professions and say that, and I'm saying that, where is that? Why are we still in the talking to ourselves mode, and when does the community get together and say, look, we'll resolve this, give the mandate to us, or we'll take the mandate, so to speak, So, I was telling somebody that nobody tells a doctor, put the heart where the liver is. They don't tell you that, right? They trust that is the doctor's mandate. Architecture, unfortunately, from the government to even the lay person, even today, for example, in the apartment complex that I live in, they don't see architecture kind of resolving their concerns, which technically are design concerns. So how do you become, as a profession, how do you use this opportunity? And that, if I have to be honest, that is my reason to get you all here, because you're thinking practices, you're still are in the profession for the right reasons, so to speak. But is this the time now to just get out there and start combining to become this force that can be counted? So I'm just going to, just going to ask you how, what are you going, how are you going to help make this possible? Because that's really the need of the hour.
So, Sarita, we've actually kind of discussed this independently as well, but I'm just going to tie back to what I had said earlier about the fact that a crisis is actually perhaps the most opportune time to actually push for a change that needs to be made. Because there is a crisis, it needs to be addressed. People will listen if there is some value that's brought to alleviating a particular bottleneck or a problem. Now, the problem also has been that architects, and we are of course to be blamed for it ourselves, are looked at largely as aestheticians. We are not really looked at people who are going to create value apart from making something look good. Now, to make that shift happen, it requires a kind of institutional rethink of the profession, of course, and also its kind of capacities to inform people in positions, the political economy in some sense. But coming back to being a little bit more, let's say, nearsighted in some sense, or short-sighted, there is going to be a lockdown that's going to be lifted right now, correct? I mean, in Bangalore, in Mumbai, in Delhi, everywhere. Maybe not in Bombay immediately, but at some point. What happens how do you then inhabit these public spaces that we are all kind of talking about, right? What happens when you go to a market? The lockdown's no longer effective. What happens to collective living and social distancing? Both are actually at odds, right? But how does that kind of combine together? So we, to a certain extent, what we did was we, at the Bandra Collective, have started working on certain precincts in Bandra to like markets and other public areas to see what is the intervention that is going to be needed in terms of design to do this together, collective living as well as social distancing. Is it going to be as simple as a kind of street pattern that we actually make along Pali Market? We found that Pali Market has become completely pedestrian, for instance. Now maybe that stays. Maybe there are plots that are opened up for parking around. So things like that. I think the opportunity is there that this is the moment of crisis also needs to be alleviated, and that we do that if we are able to kind of input on that and work with the local councillor, corporator, at least at ground level, to be able to push this forward. There is some value that people or that the profession might actually create in real terms, rather than just being something about aesthetic decisions.
Okay.
Yeah, just go ahead, Soumitro.
Thanks, Bijoy. Yeah, I think at one hand, I think there is a kind of, I think there has been in the last few years, there has been a dramatic shift in how, at a larger scale, at a political level, the imagination of development, cities, it has taken really, it's found a way to come to terms with and find an active partner in perhaps not the best ways, most likely not in the best ways at all, with capitalism for its ills rather than its potentials. So I think at that level, I think like every citizen, and as an architect, you feel completely powerless. So I think then it becomes an issue about scale and negotiating. And I think that's what Sameep is talking about is, yes, I think we've, at least I think knowing the work of all my friends here is that everybody has tried to make a difference. So that means we've tried to what is in control and to constantly negotiate for an agenda which is generally very personal, which can be very pro people or the masses, even in the most private project. So I think our worlds have been sort of hidden away. Actually, our actions have been hidden away in private realms, which is a little problematic. And but I think projects which are which can be generated, I think that's where I think the potential is, whether it's the Bandra project or where people generate ideas and find people who buy into it. I think perhaps that's the space we need to go through.
Yeah, there was maybe a couple of days ago in the New York Times. They've decided to turn around 40 miles of road in the city of New York to pedestrian ways, and figure out ways, because they've seen the benefits of doing that. So yeah, I'm envious of the group that you guys have in Bandra, Sameep, and the work that you guys do. But yeah, Sarita, it's a call to arms in a way to think. And the moment I saw this news article, I'd written to Ravi, Soumitro, and said, can we think, because like Ambrish is saying, this may also, on one hand, of course, you could also push through really stupid schemes in this time and horrendous, but it could also be the other way, where this time could be also used to do fundamental things, fundamental changes, which will require. So I mean, the onus is not on us architects. Of course, we may draw some stuff up, but I think it's the coming together of all kinds of people, like Soumitro said, maybe the neighborhood, but also people who are in places of power, like Ravi and others, who may be able to mobilize the critical mass that really needs that kind of can mobilize that kind of a rethink. So I think it's also an opportunity, like Sameep is saying, that now suddenly everything is kind of falling apart. Maybe this is the time that you can really fundamentally address some things that have always been nagging you, in terms of city form or pedestrian ways or whatever.
Kapil, would you like to go with Ambrish? Would you like to address it?
No,
Well,
I'm
yeah, no, please go on, Ambrish.
No, go ahead, Kapil.
No, I think, there's always this kind of feeling as an architect that you're kind of preaching to the choir, right? We're talking to people who empathize, who understand, but what is our sphere of influence? How do we really understand what that is? Absolutely. I think these kind of, let's say, collectives are very powerful, right? They kind of talk about this idea where how do you begin to empower or create communities which have the ability to make a tangible impact on the built environment. The kind of communities or the powers that are typically, it's the private sector, right? Which on one hand has a absolute apathy to, let's say, design unless it's not kind of fundamentally economical. And on the other hand, you have basically government who has apathy to basically design because it's all about numbers. So where do our conversations, where are they actually relevant, and how do you make them relevant? And fundamentally, as it lies within the disciplinary knowledge of architecture itself, which means as practitioners. And I think to me, this is what is very important, that we have the skills, we have the capabilities, we have the ability to analyze, to understand, to be able to work within political frameworks, social frameworks, but the ability that you can make architecture a collective experience, right? Fundamentally, at a very fundamental level. And I think this is what we're always trying, right? In our own ways. But we also, at this point in time, need to respond to the larger challenges that we see. This pandemic will come to an end, right? Once it comes to an end, then what? Is it back to business as usual? When fear is, suddenly subsides, and the next crisis is not something you can actually see. It's just too far down the road, right? So if you do not see a sea change in a value shift with people, with your clients, with the private sector, with government, where they are calling on architects saying, hey man, we need you. How are you going to join this conversation? So far, we've been, let's say, peripheral. We've remained largely peripheral, right? There are practices, there are collectives which remain sites of resistance. I mean, how do you empower them? How do you, it's about process, but it's also fundamentally about, let's say, values. So, I mean, I think each of our practices in that sense, yes, I think it's very important that they remain and they begin to actually demonstrate. I mean, kind of what I started saying, I mean, how do we continue through our work to demonstrate what these possibilities are? Whether it's about a way of working, whether it's about a way of building, whether it's about a broader, larger conversation about carbon footprints or political kind of economies, really, I mean, what is your sphere of influence and what is your message? And I think that is something that we have to crystallize, and we have to find ways to have these conversations more frequently, right? Not just with people who actually matter, but even on an actual webinar like this, I think with everyone who's actually kind of, let's say, listening. So I think at that fundamental level, yes, I think as people and as practitioners, what are we going to do differently? As such, I'm just hoping that we have more opportunity to do something that is different. I think we all fundamentally believe that yes, we need to work sustainably. We need to, work in ways in which our work feels more kind of, it's drawing in a certain sense. It's not constantly pandering to a capitalist economy, but we're a part of it. I mean, how much can you resist? How much can you not? I mean, we need patronage, unfortunately, at the end of the day. So there are dialectics within our profession that we're constantly basically grappling with. So yes, at this point in time, we have new ways of working. We're working in, let's say, disembodied ways. I mean, we've been doing this in our practice forever, But yes, I think the larger questions really here are at some level, like, I mean, I think it's this kind of crack in time and space which actually shows you that the environment can heal really quickly. Now, we can talk more about this, but finally the people who will continue this conversation remain, unfortunately or fortunately, however we frame it, the ones who finally have the power to impact the environment through making substantial changes. Yes, we need to be a part of that conversation. How can we begin to put this forward? Is it let's say media? Is it more collectives like this? I mean, I think, yes, I think it's about finding the opportunity to have a much stronger voice, which I think we haven't really had before.
I'm going to come back to you on that, but Ambrish, you want to say what you have to?
Yeah. So, over a period of time, there's something I'm getting present to as everyone is sharing. And I mean, there are some things that are beginning to form in my head as a result of this. And one of my learnings has been that you can't influence behavior. And if you look at what should I do, and if you're answering that question, I think it's very difficult to shift someone's behavior unless there's a shift in belief, and it's belief that drives behavior. And as we all know, shifting belief is humongous. It's a humongous task, and I think and it would begin at home. So for me, what I'm present to is while within the framework of our little practice, we try and push the envelope in terms of values we think would make some difference. I personally do it, and we do it as a collective. I mean, collective as within the framework of the practice, to the degree that our survival, our financial survival, is not jeopardized. So there is this kind of balance between paying the bills and making sure I make enough money, and whatever that enough definition is, and everyone does enough of that, and then within that framework we try and push what's possible. And I think that in itself, and the people here on this panel all operate to different degrees. I mean, we've been pushing the envelope within their own discourses and within their own frameworks. And I think something that I think Bijoy you touched upon, and Sameep you've already started doing. I think what's missing are two things. Is one, I think just a lot of us, and I take complete responsibility of that, are so caught up with our own challenges, our own kind of prototypes and our own experiments of what we are trying to say, because we are all grappling with that in our own ways, that putting that aside and kind of engaging as a collective, for it to have enough of a voice, so that we are able to influence decision makers, we are able to influence communities, we are able to influence a larger body of people. It will need probably a shift in the way I can see for myself, in the way I relate to myself and my practice and my role in the practice and my role with my clients, and perhaps the possibilities that begin to emerge in not looking myself as an individual or as a practice, as a part of Studio Lotus or etc., but really as a part of, to begin with, perhaps the 6 people sitting here, and we are one voice and we have a collective concern. And then how much of my time and head space and heart space and physical kind of energy am I willing to put aside to put this thing together, or give myself to this collective idea that we are expressing. And for me, that's a question that I can see opening up. I mean, an opportunity I see opening up for myself personally here. So yeah.
Sorry, guys, I'm going to belabor this point a little more. See, where I was going with, if you looked at the medical community, the moment the pandemic was in full-blown avatar, they organized themselves. There was a front line. There were researchers. There were people into communication. The medical community took part of it to communicate to the entire population, right? But if you look at architects, we're still looking at it from our comfort zone and our, whatever we have built, and therefore we'll influence more. I mean, we all know the rot lies in the Council of Architecture. You all are not represented well anywhere. The Indian Institute of Architects may mean well, but you have to have bodies that count for something. So it's, at one level you can say that the government or the patron or somebody has to come in and step in and empower. But I'm like, when will you take pole position? I mean, I think, firms see what happens is you have some firms who treat the architecture practice like pure play business. They go and take pole position, and then they don't care. They don't care. They pander to the entire demand of a capitalist economy. And then there are y'all and practices like y'all, which are so tender, it's so gentle when y'all make a spatial intervention, but y'all are, maybe, I'm sorry, I'm using a very harsh word, but unwilling to give up this. There's a great comfort in the pace in which your practice is running, and there's nothing wrong in it. But I think look at the repercussions. Look at the repercussions when practices like yours, y'all are assuming your sphere of influence is limited. Technically, right now, there's 300-400 practices listening to y'all for a reason. They admire the work that y'all do. They want y'all to take pole position. They want y'all to, so while we talk about the Central Vista project, I mean, even the architecture community has not got together and written to the architect saying, what, Bimal, I think, what, this should not go forward. We have not gone to the government and said, 20,000 crore, use it 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the 500 ways you can use it in very tangible terms. There's one thing about pushing it up and saying, what, yeah, we've kind of reconciled to it. Do you really think these 45 days have given architects an option now? Do you think we are waiting for the client to tell us, or can we just go and tell the client, look, we've been telling you for like the last 20 years. You've seen it in, in 70 it has demonstrated itself to you. What happens when you do unriddled kind of construction? So what is it going to take practices like you all to play that larger role, even at your own inconvenience? At your own inconvenience, and I think that is the critical factor to address, because 10 years ago what the council did, you're like, okay, it doesn't matter, it doesn't affect all of us, right? But it's coming closer now. Imagine 40 years I'm looking up every single document I can get to see who's listening to the architect and which architect are they listening to. And yet you have the flunkies who are going in and giving any gyan to the architect, to the government on what they should be doing. In practices like y'all, I'm saying, when will that, do you all ever want that to change? Do you all want to take that pole position? Because that's an uncomfortable thing to do. That's a long haul. You don't know what is the outcome of that. You don't know in our lifetime whether we'll be able to make that change. But do you all think you all are motivated enough to take that first step right now and say, you know what, as a community, let's collect, let's create a body that matters, that takes us seriously. Do you all think that kind of there is that shift? I'm really hoping the answer is yes. I don't know.
Sarita, sorry. The thing is, I think there are two or three things you've spoken about, and some of your analogies are not correct. I'm sorry, but so for instance, I'll just touch upon some of these briefly, and Soumitro, then you can go. But the Central Vista project, actually there is a fairly large group of architects who have taken the government head on, and they've filed cases, and it's remarkable the work, the body of resistance, and the number of architects who committed themselves to it, and I have a huge regard for them. And unfortunately, it's just yesterday the Chief Justice ruled, trashed all the objections out. So, and there's still a body of resistance. So on that front, it's not that the fraternity's been sitting quiet. There is a tremendous kind of body of resistance out there. On the analogy of crisis, I think, just building on what Sameep kind of said about the crisis being an opportunity. So the analogy of the doctors is a very direct, you see, just to give you a counterpoint, if had, and I'm not, I don't, it might come out sounding weird, but had, say, 20,000 buildings in our cities collapsed, it perhaps might have been an opportunity for a whole body of people to come up and say, okay, then everyone will be looking at the architects, right? So it's like there's a virus, so everyone's looking at the doctors, right? And the doctors are stepping up. So I know that's not what you're referring to, but all I'm saying is there is this sense of, it's not unrelated. There is this sense of, like, right now we are not relevant, right? Is this the time to make architecture relevant because there's a pandemic? It's very far-fetched, the connections. I mean, this is a time for us to introspect as individuals on what's important to me, yes. But is this a time for people to say, okay, architecture can make a difference? I don't know if that's really, the main thing is the consciousness of people shifting, are a belief system shifting, which will influence behavior, because we are service providers, like what Soumitro said, we have patrons, and patrons determine now whether the patron is a government, whether the patron is a private client. They give us, and within the realm of patronage, we try and push the envelope of what we think is important. That's how largely the community functions. Can we move beyond being patron driven to agenda driven and creating our own projects? Sure. But whether this has a relation to the pandemic or not, I mean, that's an independent, I think it's just an independent conversation.
I mean, to interject here just for a second, if one of us got this or the Central Vista project, would you have said yes?
No.
Very simple, right?
Yeah.
We need to fundamentally question our own
as a collective, we would have. But
no. I understand that, Ambrish. But this is what we're also saying, that we are given thousands of crores and hundreds of crores to build fancy, massive villas that are homes or gated communities that are fundamentally, depletive, right? that in a certain sense don't contribute in any which way, which in fact, if only thing else, strengthen the act or the status quo. I'm saying that as a profession, as a discipline, we understand how to add value, how to remain kind of, let's say, relevant because of what we know how to do. We know how to do passive design. We know how to build buildings that will consume less. We know how to be frugal. We know how to, through that frugality, still be able to respond to the demands of a certain aesthetic, right? So my point is that we cannot remain apolitical by just simply saying that, hey man, we need, we need jobs, we need patrons, all of that I understand. But we need to bring a certain kind of value system to our kind of patrons, and at a certain point say, hey man, I'm not interested in doing this anymore. And I think maybe those are my questions, right? I mean, in most of our projects, we're really trying hard to push or net zero energy. We're trying to experiment with basically timber construction because that's the only nets or let's say a carbon negative or material. How do our practices begin to at least at some level foreground a kind of value system which is aligned in a certain sense with this desperate need that we have today for sustainability, for a certain kind of environmentalism, for a certain kind of ethic, right? I mean, how sustainable is it just going to be about finding work, basically wherever it actually comes from? Where is your site of resistance, and what are you resisting? I think for me, those are very important questions.
That's a great, yeah.
So I just wanted to add. Sorry, Soumitro, go ahead. Go, Soumitro.
Okay, thanks, Sameep. Yeah, I think Sarita, good question. Yeah, I would actually draw a different parallel for the kind of practices which most of us do, I think. So I think in some ways it's like the little stone craftsman who's working, toiling, and without perhaps even the image of the temple or the church or the mosque or whatever he's part of creating, and that's going to be last for a long time. So I think there is an obsession, a passionate obsession, I think, which all of us have been involved with, which makes it relevant that within what is in control, that you do the best there. On the other hand, I think I would put part of the blame on the larger society, and I would put part of the blame on the architects. The larger, for the choices that a society makes, whether it's the choice of the political leadership, or whether it's about the choices they make on their behalf, and they choose to either keep quiet and accept it or resist it. So that's at a larger scale. And I think the missing thing, which is not only I feel the resistance through an organization of architects, but I think the larger thing is that, and perhaps I think all of us feel it, is that there is lack of serious discussion. Because if we talk about the Central Vista project, yeah, I think Kapil put it very bluntly, if you had it, you would have taken it. No, I think the question is, obviously, all of us know the question is very different as to what were the priorities. Was the priority right? Whether it was, and if it was necessary, what would have been the critical things which were necessary for a project like that, a project which belongs to the people. So the definition of projects itself becomes very, very different from the image or the form that it's presently going to take. So I think it's divided into a number of compartments here. So I think the big gap is actually beginning from our schools of architecture, actually, which unfortunately have been seeing themselves as producers for filling up offices or to make livelihood, as and that's the end of it. So I think there has been no serious writings or discussions which actually make just like our offices, most of our offices end up doing certain amount of research, which may or may not be directly linked to any project for that matter. So do academic institutions become game changers to develop ideas? So I think that is one of the beginning, because unless the seed is sown at that time, it's not going to last. It's just going to become a place which is only related to. So I think that there is a bigger problem, not just in the profession, but in the education and its imagination itself.
We'll come to education in a bit.
Yeah.
Sameep, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of things. I mean, Ambrish has already kind of mentioned, the fact that there is a huge amount of resistance to the Central Vista project, and it's fairly well documented. However, just one clarification also is the fact that the architect is not at the center of that project. Yeah, as you've seen this kind of judgment that just come yesterday, the center of the project is a kind of political economy that the architect is doing nothing about. I mean, he can't have any say in that. So that comes from a completely different point of view. I agree that this is linked to the fact that architects are not relevant, but they cannot become relevant suddenly one fine day that they say that, boss, I'm not doing this project. So it's going to have to come from like Soumitro also mentioned, from an institutional kind of rejig, where you start looking at these values like Kapil also was talking about, for being imbibed in the way that we are actually talking about the profession. However, one clarification that I do want to make, which was what Ambrish was saying, was the fact that the pandemic, of course, you can't find a cure to the virus as an architect. That's true. But there are implications in our daily lives that have a bearing on the way that we conduct ourselves and our experience within physical space. Now, physical space, however, is bang in the center of what we guys do, right? I mean, that is where we are at. And I cannot imagine a more, let's say, equipped professional, or let's say someone with the requisite skills to actually talk about that. And if we do not take on that mantle because there is no client or sponsor, then I think there is a lost opportunity there. So I definitely feel that this is the need of the hour, that while we cannot be doctors, we can definitely be spatial practitioners, that all of us are, and be able to kind of talk about what needs to be done, if not maybe in the long term, but definitely in the short term.
Bijoy, you want to add something there?
So this is the real reason that Sarita called us, to shake us up, to like, get up, wake up, So what you're asking is a question that before pandemic, we're always sort of wondering, when is it that the architect will. And as a younger practitioner, I always thought that the architect will make the beautiful drawing like Daniel Burnham, and then the world will change, as you grow older, you realize that in fact the diagram is the smallest part of that big puzzle, because there are many pieces, and unfortunately, I don't know, personally speaking, also to have a dialogue with the local councillor, or to pitch an idea for change, it requires a certain a way to do it, to talk about it, to package it, etc., that not many of us have. And so, of course, yes, architects are essential in this conversation about cities and city making, and these spatial questions that Sameep has brought up. But I think it is also the architect should also be trying to look for an ecosystem within which to make these propositions, because without that, I mean, it's all hot air, and we've seen that in the past. So you work on a lot of things and you realize that it's all going nowhere because you just don't know how to talk about it, or how to put that information in front of someone. The other thing that Kapil spoke about, this idea of sustainability, and of course, I respect all of the work that you guys are doing, but the thing that's coming to bear to me is that on the one hand, of course, technology and materials and whatever, heating, ventilation, whatever, those systems, picking the right things, making the right choices, orienting the right way, all that is actually one part of what has now come to bear. And to reiterate what I'd started with, I think sustainability is also about how we build, how we get these things
Absolutely.
done, with the whole. And I haven't been looking at that at all. In fact, the focus has been so much on the tectonics of it. What choices you make at that design phase and how you can put that together. But I've just completely ignored, and it's come to light with this crisis, that I've completely ignored what it takes to make it. What are those groups of people who are going to be mobilized, what kinds of effort that requires, how many, I have no concept of that. And I think it's an essential conversation to be had now about how we make our things and what's sustainable in that light, rather than just looking at it tectonically as an architect.
I mean,
Yeah,
if you were to begin to let's say project, right, if we just had a free for all, and given the kind of crisis that we have right now, what do you see actually happening? I mean, what we have learned, at least for me, is that the city, which has been our greatest invention in the past 200 years, 500 years, right, is unraveling. Right? We cursed kind of basically suburbia because we saw that as fundamentally unsustainable. You need infrastructure, you need roads, you need electricity, you need this, you need that to service. Hence, concentration, densification was the vision. This is what it is. Our cities are our temples. But we can also see, right, that you can live off the grid. You can live sustainably. You can have the technologies to keep you connected. We can work in disembodied ways. I'm working with, basically with an acoustic consultant who's growing tomatoes in Tuscany. And he comes online whenever I need to. He refuses.
Kapil, you're breaking up.
We've also lost Ambrish, Sarita.
Ambrish is getting online. He's getting online.
Yeah.
Kapil, we can't hear you. Kapil, we can't hear you. Hello? Just tell Kapil this call. So he's in an animated conversation and we can't hear him, so we'll just bear with that for a minute. Kapil, we can't hear you.
About this by
They have a virus.
oh goodness.
Sorry, Kapil, we lost.
Can you hear me now?
5 minutes.
Kapil, you have to start all over again.
All over again. No.
We were in Tuscany last.
We were in Tuscany, correct. Somebody was in Tuscany. Kapil, can you hear?
No, the
Still can't hear you.
Yeah.
Still can't hear you, Kapil. Kapil, we just tell people to tell him. Okay, guys, I'm just going to leave a question.
I was just talking about, that we are already working that way, and I think those kind of possibilities exist. I mean, it's
even at the risk of Ambrish biting my head off, I'm going to leave a question with you all.
Maybe someone else can move on. I'll wait.
I don't want her to answer it. You can hug me later, but I'm going to leave a question with you, where I'm talking. How can each of you all be more relevant to this larger conversation of where the practice is going, where you are, and not only in the sphere of where you're comfortable with. How can you push it out? Because really, guys, I'm telling you, as somebody who has followed the profession for the last almost 2 decades now, we need practices like yours and people like you, architects like you, to play that more fundamental role, so to be part of that, to drive that change in a sense. So I'm just going to leave that question. I'm not seeking an answer because I love you all too much.
You can be the Pied Piper, Sarita. You be the Pied Piper.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm the professional bully. The next question I want to come to is technology. Look at edge computing and AI, right? I've been seeing so many webinars where suddenly they have this great desire to tell every architect that this is now the way to build, right? How has your resistance towards technology and what it can do, and I think Kapil, you said to keep you keep an open mind to that kind of collaboration. Has your resistance to technology and what it can do in your process of architecture changed a little bit? Have you are you going to adopt more, less, collaborate more with technology-driven initiatives to reinvent the model of the business? Are you all in that space to look at it? I just thought I should.
I mean, for us, it has been this incredible experiment, right? I mean, I think with all of us, you've got whatever, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 people, 100 people working kind of, let's say, remotely right now, right? Initial, readings are kind of, let's say, positive. People are saving up to 2.5 hours of, let's say, commute a day. That's the amount of time that they're getting with their families. They're more relaxed. They're more basically rested. So you need high internet speed, and I think you can work. I mean, it's actually working for us, at least say in the pre-construction period, right? Which generally accounts for maybe 30 to 40% of the actual life of a project, right? The question then is when you move to site is another issue. You're also totally right, Bijoy. I mean, how do you make your models and how do you do all of that? But so in a certain sense, those kind of collaborations become more difficult. But yes, there are those kind of, let's say, downsides. But I don't think that those cannot be managed. I think you can still do this. I think fundamentally, technology is amazing when it's going to help you save time. It's going to make you more efficient. I think for all of those reasons, we don't glorify technology in a way where it points to a way of looking at design. But I think as a tool, as a system, yeah, I mean, it's going to be critical, I think, in the days to come, in the years to come.
Yeah, but I think my specific question was more of, so for example, voice technology, right? It's seeing leaps and bounds because of the last 45 days. You're seeing a huge focus on any kind of technology that enables voice and allows, so for example, if I could walk into my space and just talk to the space entirely and not have Alexa recorded and give it to my data to Googles of the world. So voice technology incorporated in architecture, or getting to your customer through technology, because today your customer, rural India is seeing a huge shift, right? The only passageway to them right now is technological, and that requires a different kind of collaboration, also a different kind of mindset when you develop the practice, right? So are you all kind of taking maybe side notes on it and saying, how can this impact? How can I change my practice? And take the best out of what is happening in the field of artificial intelligence or edge computing. Do you all make very active notes, and are you all actively involved in seeing what that space is bringing up?
Hey, Sameep, maybe you're the, he's the cool kind of tech guy. So let's get Sameep to take this on.
No, well,
you're already using a lot of VR and kind of stuff like this in office.
We're doing all of that, but I think for me the real question is, in some sense, what both Ambrish and Bijoy have mentioned, the fact that the tactility of the practice in some sense is in question, and what substitutes now for that ability to actually kind of pick up a model and look at it. And VR, AR stuff that we are doing in some sense is helpful, but for all of us who are of that generation where we actually kind of learned how to do architecture through making models, that's a tough one to actually imbibe straight away. So obviously our practices are not run by people just of our age group. There are younger guys who come in with different skills and who obviously will take to this in a much more kind of emphatic way. We've been trying to work remotely right now, and to be perfectly honest, all this the kind of romance of tactility and all of that aside, I mean, it's still working. I don't see a kind of real issue, except when you get to site, which is really going to be the big problem. And my sense also again is that is not going to be a problem that is to do with architecture as much as it's going to do with socio-cultural and the kind of political economy of how construction actually happens. I mean, we all know the fact that construction's actually been the way the construction industry works here hasn't changed in 200 years, right? I mean, they're still building the exact same way. And we really, I mean, the part that we really need to rethink is that the actual making of the project. And like Bijoy was talking about, whether it's about housing, whether it's about food and food and water, whether it's about even basic things like insurance and healthcare. I mean, how many of us actually kind of get into that, right? I mean, unless you have a kind of client who's kind of asking you about, which some of our clients are doing right now, about how the workers on their site were, where are they, and are they okay, and stuff like that. So I think the technology bit really is just about a medium, and I feel that we'll kind of get over that hump. We'll learn new things, we'll learn new ways of doing things. But it's really the challenge lies at the point of the actual making and what happens there. In one sense, while we are being extremely kind of networked and out there in the way that we are all kind of talking on this meeting, but our worlds are also getting extremely localized, right? I mean, my environment right now is the four walls of my house and the market that I inhabit. I mean, one used to talk about critical regionalism and the local and stuff, but this is like a micro localization, which is yeah, exactly, it's micro local. So all of this, I think we'll kind of override. It's just the act of making. I think that is what worries me the most. How does technology affect that? And if it does, what are the repercussions on labor, migrants? I mean, construction also has the largest workforce in the country, right? They can employ the most number of people. So what happens to the construction industry at large? I don't know. Maybe it's a question we have to ask Bijoy Jain, since he used to work with this model of the kind of workers as a means to kind of imagine the project, being a part of the project. So yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. I don't have any answers, quite frankly.
Just a quick comment about the romance of the models and tactility. What we've seen actually as a great benefit of this time that we've had, remotely looking at things, is that when we have meetings like this and a drawing gets pulled up, it's pretty intense. People are really looking. Whereas in the office, maybe some of us aren't looking, or that intensity of gaze is fantastic. So a lot of, Sameep is laughing like he knew this all the time, and suddenly, we're getting a sense of what the computer can do. Bringing all these.
No, I'm laughing because I'm laughing because I've been marking up drawings on my iPad, and I get comments back from the people I'm working with saying that, boss, what have you written on the drawing? I can't understand. So for me, speaking is way better. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, but that's been the big benefit, that just the focus of these meetings and really looking at something carefully, and all six of us maybe just contributing to something, looking at one particular thing. That's been a real revelation for us, just in terms of looking at things. But yeah, that's all.
So you were, Sarita, if I understood your question correctly, so there is the role of technology as in, say a virtual medium to work together, and say, Kapil's been doing it for years, and we've all clearly gotten adapted ourselves fairly effectively, and our studio seems to be, really enjoying it for pretty much the same reasons that Kapil mentioned: more time with the family, lesser commute, and all of that. So that's one part. I mean, what we've been looking at is really technology, and I don't know, that's not related again to the current situation, is what role can technology play in enabling people to do what we do best, because we're a very inefficient office, and each time we start a project and we make a door or a window, I mean, we draw it up as if we're drawing it for the first time, and it's immensely frustrating. You say, like, we've done it a bloody 1,000 times. I mean, why are we drawing it up and getting the damn jam detail wrong and architecture wrong? I mean, can't you pull up something? And we end up kind of, it's a whole loop, and we've got systems in place, we've tried kind of softwares, and I think one big role that technology should play and will play going, I mean, and I think is a huge challenge, and what we are looking at is, can it start to substitute very mundane tasks like organizing databases, organizing servers, pulling out things where needed. So a large part of it is a creative process, and a large part of it is actually, a larger part of it is translating that intent into a set of constructible drawings. And technology, I think, really has a big role, it does have a big role to play there. The second, role I see for technology, and this is something that I don't know, it might be interesting for practices to look at, is, I'm also I work closely with another organization called Mangrove, which is in the space of designing and making furniture, and I help seed that organization. And a very interesting learning for us is, I think, is to do with unpredictability. And what we are dealing with at the studio right now is we've got a fixed cost of salaries that are going out, rents that need to be paid, etc. And whether we do billing or not, or we get money from clients or not, that cost is a constant kind of weight sitting on our heads. And this other organization, because it's in the field of manufacturing, is actually got a very big variable cost. So when work is shut down, the fixed cost is very low. So we are getting a lot of opportunity to kind of think, look at what we will do post lockdown, and the pressure on the practice is much less. And one of the things we've been looking at within the studios, are there models of working? And I don't know where technology plays a role, or this is just a way of doing things where there is a lot more flexibility and agility to kind of grow teams and kind of reduce teams which are responsive to the conditions outside. Because today it's the virus, tomorrow it could be something else. And what is the practice about? Is it about the number of people? Is it about a set of values that we ascribe to? And whether there's 5 people working on it or 500 working on it, is it can it be like a cloud, and can people plug into that cloud and plug out of that cloud? So the notion of the practice itself, and that getting enabled again by technology, in some, at least aspects of technology in some way, is something. Again, it's a very abstract idea right now, but it's something we are looking at. So,
Soumitro, do you have anything to add there?
No.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to leave this aspect with one thought. I was actually talking about technology as a business game changer. So, for example, a bad example would be Live Space. They have altered the way interior design is for the customer. So, for the customer today, he looks at the app or the like a company, and the interior designer has technically become faceless. So the idea of the entire system changed the profession, quite frankly. So I'm just going to leave it out there and say that, look, there are many forces at work in terms of their pure play technology. I had somebody, a very dear friend, tell me that when you do an app, for example, content has no intrinsic value. It's the experience of the app, right? So I'm just saying, design. There is a lot of technology out there from the customer's perspective, that he will view the profession of architecture very differently, because he also wants a different kind of architecture, not just prescribed the way it is right now. So just as something to kind of mull over, and we can have a separate conversation on that later. I'm going to go now into what is Ambrish's idea, and which I thought was a terrific idea. He talked about questions each of you all have for each of you all, and only the uncensored ones, not the so whatever you all want to ask each other, the floor is open. Anything specific, if you'll have for each other. And Sameep, we are getting you to sing, so you might as well keep a song ready.
I'm just going to. We'll do a different session.
No.
Towards the evening, the lights are dim. A drink. By the way, I've been just sipping on water. Right? It's not a gin and tonic or something like that. So.
Do you all have questions for each other? No, can't be.
Oh, questions for each other. That was Ambrish's idea, so he should go first.
Actually, I asked whatever. Sarita asked whatever I was going to ask, so I'll just have to come up with you one.
Anybody has any questions for each other in terms of anything? Otherwise, I have 2 more questions.
No, I think safer we ask each other questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, here's one. Let me throw it out there.
Is anyone else?
I'm sure we're all enjoying this time. Are you all seriously looking at the possibility of somehow this becoming a little more permanent. I mean, for me, honestly, what was amazing is where normally I would have anywhere between a 9 to a 12-hour work day. I was getting stuff done in like 4 hours. I was done. 4 to 5 hours, I was done. As in my interaction with the office, I could finish everything, and I just had time to myself to do other things that were important. So now this is this massive fantasy. Now I'm like, yahan kya kar rahe hain, you know, why am I here? You know,
we've all been enjoying that. There are very few meetings because right now, of course, the sites are closed, so you're not losing half.
Sure.
The day, you know, you're there in the office for more than 8 hours, or at least 8 hours you can spend instead of 1 hour that in a day that you get, you know, and you're scrambling. It's yeah, I think you spoke about reminded me, made some good sun-dried tomatoes. The air is fantastic.
I think Kapil's touched upon the subject of fantasy. So Bijoy, what's yours?
For my fantasy.
I think most appropriate.
Recorded
No fantasies. No, I agree with Kapil. I mean, in fact, you know, I mean, to not to be completely insensitive to all of the troubles that people are facing, I've been actually secretly wishing that the lockdown gets extended, you know, that we get to spend more time at home. The benefit of it is that, you know, for the longest time, because of the pressures of the office, Suni, my wife, has not been cooking at all. And now in the past 45 days, every meal has been amazing, you know, like Suni and my daughter have been cooking up, you know, so there's cakes after dinner, and there's like, you know, so it's like, of course, it's a good thing that you can only see my head and not the rest of it. But that's, I mean, it's been incredible to be at home and to just hang out and, you know, have all of this amazing food and to watch. It's a privilege. I mean, that, you know, few of us have that, you know, we're able to enjoy this time. Of course, constantly thinking, you know, guiltily of all of the other things that are going on. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, if there was a fantasy, then this is it, you know, that this would be the way that you would spend maybe 3 hours in the morning with the office and then have the rest of the day to, you know, just hang out. Yeah.
I just think, more space to think and ruminate, and you know. But you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, it is a privilege. It remains a privilege that we have, you know.
Yeah.
It's probably not the same experience for a lot of other people, you know. But as professionals, I think that, I mean, your rentals are going to be lower. I was looking at taking on more space, and I'm like, maybe I don't need to.
You don't need to.
I don't need to. You know, I mean, I think there's a certain efficiency in this model, which.
In fact, Infosys has just announced that they're going to have permanently a lot a working
at
from home.
At that scale.
Yeah.
It's really something. Yeah.
Big impact on the city.
I think,
truth
you know.
Truth or dare, Sameep.
Sorry.
Truth or dare.
Truth or dare.
Truth or dare.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Truth or dare.
Come on, Sameep.
No, actually, secretly, I've been waiting for the lockdown to end because between Zoom meetings and the dishes and sweeping and swabbing the floor, I had a much more idyllic lifestyle when I was working in the studio. I want to go back to it. So, well, there you go.
I had a women panelist on.
Oh yeah.
Right now. Yeah. So,
actually, why aren't there more women on this panel?
Truth or dare, Sameep? You kind of drive. Truth or dare? Come on, Ambrish, you have to get ready.
Truth. You know.
Come on, go on.
No. Now I did the first bit. Now you have to do the second bit. Yeah? I set him up for it. I set him up. Now somebody's got to.
If anybody wants to ask a truth or dare question to Sameep Padora, come on, this is your chance.
Hey, also, I need some tips about how do I handle my kind of afro now here from at least Ambrish and Kapil.
Dude, I mean, come on.
What a question! What a question!
Yeah.
Keep it to yourself. I did that.
Profound questions when they're talking to each other. My God, like I thought they would be asking about, I don't know, the next
Okay, so
model of design.
what's your fantasy? Yeah, come on, that's the easy one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the easy one. I guess.
Actually, the thing is, what we've spoken about, for the longest time, I've actually planned to kind of shift to Himachal during the summer months. So do a summer studio in Himachal, where I already have I bought a little apple orchard and wanted to kind of make my own.
Wow.
So that's already there. I'm working on it incrementally, but it's fine. Now, thanks to this, it's been pushed back by about 30 years. So, but yeah, that was the idea. Yeah, that I would kind of spend summer months away in Himachal in this apple orchard and work from there. But yeah, doesn't look like it's happening.
One thing now for the audience, guys. Do you have any? And please don't say no. Leave the audience with one question that you think they should. Just with one question that you think is pertinent. Not asking them to do anything with it, but if you can just leave the audience with that question. And then, Sameep, we are going to request you to sing. So, yeah. So, you want to go with it? Bijoy?
To go on the same track, I mean, my question would just be to those architects who are listening in to just, to think about the larger system, behind the work, the construction, all of that. I mean, we are also grappling with it, but it'd be important as a community to start thinking of, those things as part of your design exercise. That would be my question.
Soumitro?
Yeah, I would sort of reiterate. Thinking about social responsibility as an architect, also in a big way as a philosopher and a thinker, because I think it's easier done to pick up the learnings of making and the sensitivity which one can develop. But I think for the path forward, I think it requires the possibility to imagine alternate scenarios, which are critical.
Thank you. Kapil?
I think if to kind of frame it in the kind of simplest way possible in a single line is, how do we ensure that architecture remains relevant? Simple.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to. I'm throwing back the question to you also. Okay, Ambrish.
So it's a question I'm taking away for myself, and which this conversation has left me with is, why do I do what I do, and what am I willing to give up to be outside my comfort zone that prevents me from being 100% true to what comes up in that why.
Wonderful. Sameep?
I don't know, actually. I mean, there are so many. I mean, all of the 4 questions that they mentioned are probably encompass all of the questions that I had in my mind. But the only thing that I would probably kind of talk about is the fact that while there is a kind of huge pressure of the kind of paradigms that govern what we do, I think the answer still lies in the fact that down at the smallest level, at the level of the individual and the individual's kind of relationship with his immediate environment, what is it that you can change? And I think each one of us kind of considers that, that would be a great start point for me.
Okay, and Sameep, your turn to sing now. And I'm not kidding you, we are not getting off until you sing.
No, I don't think this is the best medium for that. And, but
yeah, come on, we're waiting.
Ooh.
I put myself in this position. So the other thing that okay, so I'll just sing a kind of quick line from. I don't know how it carries through in something like this. Yeah, I mean,
Sounding
it might not work
perfect.
the best.
You can blame it on the technology.
I'll blame it on the technology already. So, but anyway, so it's the song by Farida Khanum, Aaj jaane ki zid na karo. I'm really kind of moved because of the fact that we're all here together right now. So I like you guys not to go, but
Come on.
Yeah.
We love you, man.
So,
We love you.
Yeah, go ahead.
and this is going to Aaj jaane की जिद ना करो हाय मर जाएंगे हम तो लुट जाएंगे ऐसी बातें किया ना करो आज जाने की जिद ना करो
Wow.
Maybe the technology, but you know what? True.
Thank you, Sameep. Thank you. I just hope
Superb,
Sarita doesn't.
superb.
That made the whole afternoon.
Really. Lovely.
Lovely.
Amazing.
Thank you,
Ambrish, between
Sameep.
your hugging and my singing, I think we got this wrapped up.
You got it covered.
Guys, thank you so much for indulging us. Thank you so much. I will reiterate on behalf of the whole community. I know I represent every single thinking architect in India when I say this. We have the deepest admiration for the work that you'll do. What you'll do is very relevant, and we are hoping that you all use this 45 days to spread, to be that circle of influence, increase that circle of influence, because it's never been more critical. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for making it easy. It's a nice and easy conversation. And I would like to mention a big thank you to Ratan, who could not be here because there was some issue with the camera, but we'll get him, for a next webinar. He's the most gracious person I know. So thank you all for being here, and for the audience, I hope you all had a great time. And I hope if anything you have to remember is, aaj jaane ki zid na karo.